Hey, Mario, thanks for joining the Kernel DeFi podcast. Really excited to have you on, especially having a former Kernel fellow back on to talk about your DeFi protocol. Love to jump in and have you explain a bit more about your background and your DeFi journey and what brought you to start Revert Finance.
Sure. Thanks for inviting me, Shawn, by the way, and fellow Kernel and Kernel DeFi Guild member as well. Yeah, so my backstory, I'm an engineer, a programmer. During my career, I've done several, specialties from backend to developing apps. I don't remember exactly at what point, but I read the original Bitcoin white paper, and the wasn't really particularly interested before that in economics or even finance. Interesting, but not something I considered pursuing as a career, really. But the permissionless aspect of Bitcoin even back then, and people were already talking about things that sort of I guess are similar to what DAOs became, and that really got me excited. I remember, and at that point I was working on building mobile apps, and didn't make the jump full time, but a couple of years later, I think I realized that this is early 2016. Realized that I really wanted to just go fully into the crypto industry. Ethereum had launched recently, and that was terribly exciting. It just seemed like the early stages of something I wanted to be part of. And there was a company starting a Bitcoin exchange here in Mexico City, where I'm living and was living at that point, and it was very small. Basically, the founders and a couple of more people, and I just went to their office and convinced them to hire me. Basically, is the truth of it. And it was a really great experience. A little short time after that, they raised a round, and then a year or so months later, a next round. And by the time when I started, we were 6 people in a small room and in a house that we shared with other companies. And when I left, there was this rocket ship, fully crewed already. There were I think 30 engineers, and I don't even remember how many more people. So that was really cool and exciting, and just having the opportunity to see that period of a company where it's because it wasn't gradual, right? You notice the inflection points and just in growth and also in when the rounds came and it then time to scale the team. So that was a really cool and great experience. And I left in 2018, a little bit after the crash. Still terribly excited about crypto, but just saw that there was really a need in exchanges like this one with Bitso is the one I was working at. That they really required market making. You'd see sometimes a spread between there's a foreign exchange rate that still you could calculate the spread between buying Bitcoin in Mexico and buying Bitcoin in Bitstamp or Coinbase, and it was quite wide sometimes in the 5%, 6%, depending on the volatility, of course. So it seemed obvious that that market making was really lacking, and so I started a company to do market making on centralized exchanges with a couple of founders, and build that out during the bear market. And then by 2020, I had been paying attention to DeFi since Maker. I remember being probably one of the first projects that really seemed particularly cool to me. But the DEXs at that time, we're doing a lot of trading, all the centralized exchanges. And there were this, I forget the names, Ether Delta, and there were a bunch of those exchanges that were completely different than how AMMs ended up working. But we were sort of paying attention to that, but not really the focus. But then I think at some point, reading the Uniswap paper was really mind blowing. I think the first version and really the code actually, which was it really brought home to me the idea of there's a lot of very very basic things to discover and implement on a blockchain, and they can be truly revolutionary, and they are really, it's there's a lot of like opportunity to explore and experiment and easily test out these ideas, no? And Uniswap, like at that point, it just seemed really interesting and cool, and like the brought home to me the power of Ethereum as a smart contract platform, right? And the idea of DeFi. But I didn't really think it would be as successful as it did, obviously, or maybe not obviously, but to me at least, maybe because I was like very hyper focused on trading in order books, right? And I kept seeing all the difference and like the limitations of it. But at some point in during 2020, I realized, well, first I exited my previous company. There was like a difference of vision with some of the co-founders, and I was left figuring out what to do next. But really it was for me like figuring out what to do next in DeFi, because at that point it was 2020 and I just felt the same way I had felt in 2016, where like crypto in general, like this is the opportunities.
Was that DeFi summer 2020?
A little bit, yeah, like this a little bit earlier, but yeah, like totally by DeFi summer I was like fully immersed. And this is actually how Revert was born, because, well, it was born as a spreadsheet that I used to track my positions during those insane weeks of DeFi summer, right? Kicking off with like the sushi thing and then all the thousands of very shady sometimes clones that popped up. But yeah, that was incredibly fun, and it was also like very very clear that you needed some tools to actually track your performance against not having put your money in those pools in the first place, like the concept of impermanent loss and also like impermanent loss. But I think widely understood, and there were like different tools at that point that you could use, but actually tracking like the whole thing, for like having a tool that does it for you and takes into account that your position is now in some farm with an unknown contract that is giving some amount of unknown tokens, and you really have to like take that into account to see if it offsets the impermanent loss. And I was doing this in Excel. I wake up every morning and just manually go through my flow of getting the latest prices, getting like the latest positions. Doing it really, it seemed obvious that if there was something to build there, right? And I by the end of the year, like I kept wasn't sure like if that was like the thing, because there's a lot of interesting opportunities in different capacities, I think, in DeFi. And of course, like protocols seem like the obvious thing you want to try, but it just seemed to me that like if you need the tool, there's probably other people who also need it, right? And also just I think it's a pretty good way to develop products, right? To just scratch your own itch, as they say, and that's how it was born. And by the end of that year, I joined a hackathon on. It was ETH Global, and at that point, those hackathons, because it was everything remote, they were a little longer. So I think it was 4 or 6 weeks, coincided with the Encode Club hackathon. So I joined both of them and just turned that spreadsheet into an app, like a web app. Convinced a friend who had worked with me previously, a designer, to help me, come up with a great design, and he really, outdid himself, and yeah, it did pretty well on both those hackathons, and that sort of like confirmed to me that people were encouraging, and there was like at that point interest in by investors, so it seemed like, yeah, this is probably an interesting thing to keep working on, and that was it really. A couple of months later, like a couple of hundred, I started raising up the pre-seed round. And then by the end of summer, we closed it and started, putting together the team. And here we are.
Well, fascinating journey. So much to pick apart. I want to kind of dive into a couple of those areas before we dive into Revert itself and go into the product. But a quick commentary. I feel like so many of these DeFi protocols start off in a spreadsheet, right? So I feel like I'm tracking a lot of my positions in a spreadsheet, in a Google sheet, for example, right?
Yeah.
I remember DeFi Summer 2.0 this past year, tracking so many of my my positions in that. So if you can track it in a spreadsheet, you can probably code it, right? Anything you can create in Excel ultimately is programmable. So seems like that's an interesting opportunity, and it's interesting to hear from about your journey from like Bitcoin in the early days all the way to kind of looking at market making and the like. I think one other thing I'd love to just learn about as well, just to give our listeners a flavor for your local scene as well, is I understand Mexico City is a pretty thriving kind of crypto capital as well. And ETH Mexico City, I believe, is currently happening right now. So I want to thank you for taking time out of that activity. But can you describe the scene there? What is the level of interest and activity down in Mexico City around crypto, Web3, DeFi?
Sure. So I think Latin American countries, other areas around the world as well, I'm sure, but you know, we've like generational experience of bad central bank management, right? So I think there's already an easier mentality to accept that perhaps like using the official currency isn't in your best interest, right? It's particularly so because even within the latest years, where in some economies like Mexico has been arguably properly managed or comparatively properly managed as opposed to like we used to have in decades past. Still not, you can see your that you're not performing as well as US dollars as it has been in this case, right? And you don't have the option. Like I don't think Americans, I'm of course generalizing, but realize that like just like like if I'm sure a lot of people in Mexico had the option to keep their savings in US dollars, for example, or euros or Swiss francs or whatever that has been better performing than pesos, they would do, right? And I think that is more obvious to people here. Like it's not like a constant, I'm sure, request at banks, but it seems like an obvious jump for people who are already thinking of start saving their money, and like keeping it in pesos is not your ideal, but that's the reality of it. So that already brings us a little bit, to the crypto mentality, I think. But I think what's happened in Mexico City and say in 2016, I think there were very little, like it was such a niche community that I think we probably sort of knew each other. There were like 2 or 3 different, meetups going on in the city, and it was similar group of people. So it was really tiny, I would say. But I think what really made it kick off was first that in general, like the startups in Mexico City just started booming, like since 2015, 2016. A lot of more funds were started here in Mexico. Foreign capital also started investing in startups. So that already started to have like a little techie, vibe in the city, and you'd see it in a lot of new, JS meetups or whatever, technology meetups. That also might help. And then, I think for whatever reason, after the pandemic, a lot of there was Mexico City, as you know, pretty international. There's always been like a widespread, like a big community of expats of different, areas of the world. Even here, a lot of people working in technology remotely. Wasn't that odd, but I think, after the pandemic and people started working more remotely, Mexico City, I think, sort of has become this remote area hub. And like I'm right now at a WeWork, and if I go one store down, which is like the free desk area, I would say like it's 80% or 90% people who aren't from Mexico, and I've noticed that also makes like new crypto meetups have appeared, and like there's a higher percentage of this type of people going to these meetups, and I think that's also made it really start growing more rapidly.
Seems like a fascinating mix of expats and native kind of local interest in this opportunity of crypto, especially when you talked about central bank mismanagement, pretty rife across the world, perhaps particularly pronounced in the Latin American regions. Before we jump into Revert, I also wanted to see if you could explain to those folks who may not be fully familiar with what a AMM is, if you could describe what that is, how that helps correct some of the inefficiencies that you were talking about in the market. And I'd love to have that as a tie-in to going over Revert itself as well.
Sure. Yeah, I think very good. So AMMs, I think were just particularly stepwise innovation in how to implement dexes in blockchains in general, and Ethereum in particular. And so the original idea, if when people were trying to just implement the same concept of order books, which is how centralized exchanges work to Ethereum, had a lot of problems, but all born out of the limitations of a blockchain, right? It's the throughput of transactions is very limited, and that makes the cost high. And so if you want to say place orders and then cancel them, which is what market makers are doing all the time, if you do that on chain, that becomes really expensive. So there were sort of centralized solutions and different ways to try to get around the problem. But they were all trying to implement an order book or either on chain or other projects off chain in a different type of system architecture. But so what Uniswap did, which was I think innovative. I think with regards to Ethereum, at least I think the concept was discussed earlier. Even Vitalik suggested it, I think at some point before Uniswap. But the idea is basically you define a formula. In the case of Uniswap is x times y equals k, where x and y are the amount of each tokens in a pool, and k is the result of that. And that's and that's the invariance that you keep. And any change so when you deposit, so when you swap, you deposit say asset X and then withdraw asset Y, and that can be allowed as long as the amount for it will allowed are so that formula is kept. But the implications of this is that you don't need an order book, so you can perform. You can have deep liquidity and have workable dexes on chain, which are completely trustless. There's no centralized party in the system, which has happened in some of the previous attempts at building dexes. And also I think particularly cool to me was the idea of the market makers not having to be complex systems that have to operate really quickly and sort of are run by specialized companies. LP on Uniswap was, I guess, democratic is the word. Anyone can do it. Not everyone should in every case, but that's that I think is really crucial. It takes this flow of income that was captured by the exchanges and the market makers, which are in both cases specialized companies, and sort of gives everyone access to it. And that I think is really cool philosophically. I think it aligns perfectly well with what I'd like to work on. But it's also, I think, the only way you can have liquidity in the long tail of assets, right? If we're going, and I think we are, to a world where more things are financialized and we have more tokens, then the model, even if we weren't doing it on blockchains, and for some reason it all happened on whatever centralized exchange, I don't think it's be able to have that model of market makers providing liquidity to all the long tail of assets, right? And the Uniswap model solves that, because the same people who the DAO who emits the token can easily be LP or other holders. So that's really the way to unlock this world where we have assets for a lot of many use cases.
Can you talk about the importance of liquidity providers, LPs, and the difference between institutional LPs and retail LPs? And my understanding is that perhaps Revert is trying to give an edge back to retail LPs, but correct me if I'm wrong. Love to hear your take on the importance of LPs in this ecosystem.
Sure. So so LPs are crucial, right? Because that's how the thing works. They are like the way you create a new market, say, or a new pool, as the term on B3 is by providing liquidity, right? So they're like the party who has to be there at the start. And with regards to institutional and LPs, like the first thing is that you can have institutional LPs who are using like the same tools and frameworks that retails use, right? And I think this is still true for Uniswap. Whereas in micromaking traditionally in finance, the institutional or the corporations who do this have specialized systems that one couldn't run individually, right? Or you have to be like specialized in that specific systems programming and financial industry to be able to do. So that's like so that's a fundamental difference. I think that's kept with Uniswap V3, and perhaps we should go to that, right? Because there was this big jump in Uniswap V2 and V3 with regards to how it operates, but it translated to making it perhaps more complex, or more decisions need to be made can be made by an LP, right? And a lot of people, I think, read that or speculated that would mean the end of liquidity providing had the way we used to know it, right? And they assumed that it was all gonna go. I don't know if like corporate in the sense of having jump or what have you running it, but they assumed, I think, that that you require this like higher level liquidity manager protocols, and they would be the ones making the decisions about what range to select and so on. And I don't think it's necessarily true. I think that's an interesting space. I think it'll keep growing, and I think it's still sort of like in a pre-product market fit type of stage, I would say, for those tools. But I think will never the aspects of being able to choose your own positions will never go away. Like I think the mistake that a lot of people made in sort of like speculating this is the assumption that, well, now I have to constantly, like before I would just deposit my assets in the pool, no range to select, right? And just monitor them and see how they're performing, right? And now you have to select a range, and people assume this is similar to an order book. You'll have to constantly be updating your position. That takes a lot of gas, which, when Uniswap launched, gas was, I think, at like V3, at the all-time high. So like people just jumped and said like, oh no, like I'm not gonna be able to rebalance like that frequently. I'll just use this pool. And I think that's a mistake. Yeah, like that's an incorrect strategy. Like you wouldn't want to do that even if the gas cost was negligible, as it is for like certain amounts of positions in Polygon, for example. Like I guess, but in Polygon it doesn't have to be that much for it to, or optimism, of course, for the gas cost to be negligible. That introduces other risks of impermanent loss and crystallizing that. So yeah, I think like retail specialized LPs are going to exist for a long time, and I think it's one way to think of it is it's a form of trading, LPing, and that's, I think, where people get caught up when they confuse it with a risk-free yield, or I guess nothing is risk-free, but like say if you're putting ETH into Compound or Aave for whatever returns are given for lending, there's no market risk that you're taking with regards to the price, right? If you're just lending them out. Whereas if you're LP, you definitely have market exposure, market price risk. So it's this is like a form of trading. This is the way we think about it, and I think that we're building tools to make those decisions and like tracking easier. But we see it that we're targeting advanced users for sure, which I think are the ones we should.
Got it. So why don't we jump right into the Revert product, and love if you could just talk through. I think we're going to use Hidden Adams public address as a way of going through the tool. So I'm going to actually, what I'll do is I'll actually share the Revert screen here, and I'll talk it through for the folks who are listening only on audio overall. But I'd love if we could just talk through some kind of typical user journeys for some of the advanced LPers that you mentioned. So if I just type in hitting.eth and click go ahead.
Yeah. No, I was going to say that yeah, we've like, I've been using Hayden's account, and I think, he's the founder and his public account is, I'm sure he has other positions. But yeah, it's an interesting one, particularly because it shows like his B3 positions where like, I think he has, one of this is the first position ever created on Uniswap. If you go, yeah. And I don't think he's particularly trying to maximize his returns. For example, I think that first, like the next one, the third one in like that Uni ETH position, I believe like if you click on expand here, you can see it's out of range, by the way, like he selected this range and it's gone down. It's gone down, but you can see the NFT ID right at the bottom, and it's like the first position, right? So I'm pretty sure this has historical and sentimental value for him. But so I don't think he particularly cares about monitoring its performance or initiated with that one.
This is like going through the museum of DeFi, basically, right?
Definitely.
So
like
it's not necessarily optimizing for profits here.
For this position, yeah, for this position, I would say like I would think if Hayden were to sell this NFT ID on OpenSea, it'd probably go for a lot higher than the current market value, given the tokens, right? But he has other, like, I think at the top he has the stable coin position, like stable coin, like that USDC pair, or USDC
pair
USDC
as well. Versus Tether,
yeah, and that one as well. You click on expand, you can see a little bit. Like the idea is like this is you load it and it'll give you like the fee APR, total PNL of your positions, and like the performance over the last 24 hours, and then if you drill down, you'd see you'd see like so to the left are pool wide settings, so like the volume, the reserves, the price the price for each asset with and the price divergence, which we have to figure out what's going on there, but it will be zero, actually the correct result. And price divergence helps you because price divergence will cause impermanent loss in your positions, right? So you want to have the fee and reserves ratio to be as high as possible, or moving up and to the right, and the price divergence to be as low as possible, or coming back down, right? One will increment your proportion of fees, one will reduce increase the amount of divergent loss you're having, and below
I understand if you click on this compound fees, that gives you a sense for how much you can make with auto compounding from Revert, right? So in this case, it seems like
it doesn't.
It doesn't.
I mean, so this is like for a year's time frame improvement, right? And given the gas cost, you wouldn't break even after you would break even after more than a year. So this is why it's negative for this yearly time frame. So like auto compounding is basically in Uniswap B3, the fees accumulate outside of the pool, and so if you wanna like have the fees accumulated be compounded by like a compounding back account, you'd have to take the fees and redeposit them to the pool, which involves like 2 or 3 transactions. So the auto compounder is a protocol we built to this automatically, right? But again, like it's I think it makes sense for positions that have a higher fee APR. It also makes a lot more sense. Like it's a lot cheaper to compound on L2s, right? So doing this on Opti or
so it's almost like, is there almost like a threshold here? So like I'd imagine there's at least probably a 10% APR threshold before you start to see significant gains with auto compounding.
There is a threshold, but it depends on each chain, right? It depends on the gas cost, and so on main it's higher than the other chains.
I guess with Optimism and Arbitrum, you're probably okay with sub 10% because of the gas fees are so low, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it compounds much more frequently as well. we wrote a white paper and like render some charts about like given the APR, the fee APR, what your performance would be with compounding, right, over a year time period. But yeah, you're right. Like, there's a threshold.
One question I have for you is like auto compounding definitely simplifies the journey for LPs, especially when they're looking for a little extra juice to their APR. How are LPs handling the kind of tax situation? And I realize that's an unanswered question across across DeFi overall, but does auto compounding complicate the tax situation? Is it, I guess, particularly for those who are earning in the US, but also globally as well?
That's a good question. I'm not sure. Like, to be honest, I think the way the industry standard way to measure, the performance of a position, which is this concept of, I guess, holding the assets and never putting them in the pool, and then what your impairment loss is. I'm not sure you can take that in account if you're like reporting. I think you probably have to just benchmark against the USD or whatever peso value of your positions are. So I don't think we definitely didn't build this with like tax reporting purposes in mind. Some users we've talked to have like sort of like asked about possible features towards that, but it's not something we have in the short time frame. But I think it have to be probably solved by allowing more configuration into how we actually do the accounting, and that's something that's in our roadmap. So perhaps instead of like benchmarking against whole, you want to benchmark against the USD value. We have more requests of people asking us to benchmark against ETH value. Like, I only care if I'm making more ETH at the end of the day. So I think that's probably a way we get closer to perhaps serving that specific need.
Yeah, I think people in general are benchmarking against ETH when they think about kind of appreciation or investment performance, and unfortunately have to look against the USD when it comes to US tax reporting. So maybe an opportunity there. Wanted to jump quickly into the docs as well, if you think that's a good place to go to just
sure
look more into some of the feature sets of Revert overall beyond the app. So I know that we talked about position analytics, which we roughly looked through. I think you're focused on Uni V3 at the moment, been a large focus, and that's where a lot of the liquidity is. Right. And we talked a lot through some of the fee APRs and some of the divergence and asset ratios that people could take a look at. Also, liquidity incentives. And is this an easy way for folks to just like see what the best performing LP pools are?
So this is using the B3 staker contract, which Uniswap released, which basically allows DAOs or any token holder to incentivize liquidity in specific pools, right? So this just shows the current running programs for different pools on currently on Ethereum and Polygon, where the B3 staker has been launched. And yeah, understandably, you'd see perhaps some interesting pool there, and then go to the initiator, which is another part of perhaps of what we've built to help you decide if you want to provide liquidity for that pool. And if you're providing liquidity, then the process of staking and claiming the reward is also something you can do from within the app.
Got it. And then top positions is actually the top active positions then.
The top performing positions in the 4 chains where Uniswap B3 is currently deployed, and you can like filter them out by different criteria, right? Like dates or specific tokens, or minimum TVL, what have you. So to help you to browse and get ideas of how positions are performing. Yeah.
And you talked about initiating LP positions as well, but basically, this is an easy tool. The initiator is an easy tool to start LP.
Yeah, well, I would say powerful tool. Like when you have to stake, decide on what positions what range you're gonna set your position in. It helps you. Well, first decide on which pool, like fee tier, right? You because for each pair there's different fee tiers, and you probably want to look at some metrics before you decide. But once you like select a price range, it helps you see the historical price and also like run a real quick, back test that tells you how the provision would have performed in the last, whatever period you select. So give you some idea, of like what you can expect with regards to fees, perhaps, for that range, and then initiate it at the end of the flow.
Got it. Are you using any sort of kind of, I don't know, linear regression modeling or something like that to like determine future performance, or is it just like, okay.
It's just back testing. Given the range, we assume like the position would have been in range. We assume that the position would have been in that range in the last period, and just see what percentage of the fees they would have gotten and the impairment loss that would have happened, and then that's what we report.
Got it.
Going
okay.
backwards. Yeah.
Similar to any portfolio back testing, basically. Okay. Got it.
Yeah, I think so.
And then auto compounder, which is what we had talked about as well, which is the ability to kind of automatically compound some of the earned fees back into your position overall, and you're able to see the difference between not having auto compounding turned on and having it turned on as well. And it seems like you have this P&L as well, and the like. Yeah.
So for positions where it's actually advantageous to perhaps do auto compounding given the year time frame, we like highlight that issue. Like it says like auto compound optimal. It has a little. I'm sorry, I was pointing at the screen. It has a little tag that says auto compound optimal. And if you go to the table that shows like the both scenarios, it'll tell you why we believe this is like auto compound. Like in this case, it'll increment your returns by 5%. And of course, the higher the APR is, the higher the improvement by compounding, right? And you can also the time preference is important. So like if you're keeping your position for you're expected to keep it for 90 days, then look at the improvement at those 90 days instead of like at the end of the year, right? But we basically analytics is our core, right? So we think the auto compounder by talking to users facilitates a lot of like a manual tasks that we're doing, but we want to help them make the decisions correctly using the data. At the end of the day, if you use auto compounding and it's not advantageous, what's going to happen is it's probably not going to get compounded very often. So it's just not very useful. But the point is knowing when it's useful and then being able to easily activate it.
All right. Well, thanks for that whirlwind tour of Revert. It seems like this is built for the data nerds in the DeFi world, especially some of the advanced users out there with a lot of like very, very useful tooling and abilities to understand some of the opportunities that might be missed out there, especially very interesting about some of the Uniswap V3 LP auto compounding. As we wrap up, I'd love to see, do you have any asks for our audience, whether it's to check out Revert directly? How can they stay in touch with your work, and any last words that you might have?
Yeah, definitely check out Revert. Of course, if you're already an LP, then you should go straight ahead and see how you're performing. I've heard some great and frightening stories of people doing that, but in any case, I think you should do it. And if you're not an LP, I think it's a good way to sort of like understand what people are doing over there by browsing our top positions. And if you please have any feedback or comments, join our Discord. We try to interview as much users as we can at this point. And you can follow us on Twitter as well, Revert Finance. And we'll be posting our updates. There's some interesting stuff coming soon.
Well, thanks, Mario, again for joining. Super exciting to learn about Revert and your story.
No, thanks so much, Shawn. This was fun, and appreciate greatly the invitation.